All right. All right, I'll give another minute for folks to slowly come in. All right. Okay. All right, welcome everyone. I'm Dante O'Hara. My pronouns are he, him. I'm an organizer with the Claudia Jones School for Political Education based in Washington, D.C. And we are excited to host tonight's event with the DC chapter of the Debt Collective, the DC Poor People's Campaign, and the DC chapter of Science for the People, called Racial Capitalism and the Student Debt Crisis, Building Collective Power with the Debt Collective. For those who are unaware, the Claudia Jones School for Political Education is a grassroots educational organization committed to enriching the political perspectives of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan community. It strives to be a force in the fight against injustices of a racist ruling class engaged in a relentless class war against the working poor whose labor is the source of capital that is used against the same workers in furthering their exploitation. The Claudia Jones School creates opportunities for the community to explore complex issues of interlocking oppression such as class, race, and gender by engaging workers and intellectuals from labor unions, organizations fighting racism and police repression, progressive cultural organizations, and academia. We would also like to acknowledge the people upon whose land that the Claudia Jones School exists. This is the land of the Nakach Tank people, from which the name Anacostia is drawn. The closest surviving First Nations people are the Piscataway Nation, who holds their annual celebrations in Occoquan, Maryland. With that being said, I would like to do a few housekeeping items before we get started. I will be facilitating this event while we have other organizers in the background moderating the chat. At the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will see a tab for the chat box in which you can insert comments and questions and engage with the dialogue. We also ask that everyone remain muted during this event. We will also have a section for breakout groups after the presentations later this evening. This will also be recorded so we can have it available for people who were not able to make it and attendees that want it for future reference. It is also being live streamed on our YouTube channel for those who are not able to log into the Zoom link. With that being said, I will now introduce our opening musical performance for the night, who will be Ben Grosscup from the People's Music Network. Just give me a second. So Ben Grosscup uses the power of song to attenuate the ideas and values of the justice-based resistance movements he is a part of. His mission in life is making music a vibrant part of these movements. Drawing upon activist folk singing traditions, he brings new songs to the places where they're most relevant. He works with unions and other social justice organizations to raise political consciousness while singing together for a common purpose. He performs a wide range of politically inspired music, much of it original. Based in Greenfield, Massachusetts, Ben serves as the executive director of the People's Music Network, a diverse community of singers, artists, activists, and allies that cultivate music and cultural work as catalysts for a just and peaceful world. Since the pandemic began, People's Music Network has gone from running in-person events in the Northeast United States to running online events that feature People's Music Network members as well as non-member comrades in song from all over the world. And with that, without further ado, I'm giving the floor to Ben. Thank you.
Dante, thank you so much for that introduction. I want to also thank my comrade and spiritual mentor, Lucy Murphy, who first told me about the Claudia Jones School for Political Education. And it's a real honor to be able to share this online space with you all to talk about a very important issue. Yes, and the People's Music Network, you can learn more about us at the peoplesmusic.org. So here's the opening musical performance. Well, this song was first written by Merle Travis back in 1946. Here's the way it sounded back then. You load 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store. Well, for generations, coal miners were paid not in cash, but in scrip. And this scrip was redeemable only at the company store. You see, as a worker, your life was directly controlled by your employer. Not just while you were working the mine, but when you came home for a meal, knowing your food could come from just one place. And to pay for it, you had to go into debt. Well, some things change, and sadly, others stay the same. So I've updated this song for today's generation of debtors. Some people say you gotta get a degree, and after 4 years you have to pay back the fees. Now I'm paying my fees out on my own. How am I ever gonna pay back my student loans? You go to 4 years of college, and what do you get? Another diploma and a mountain of debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I must stay. I owe my soul to Sally Mae. I borrowed for school so I could get smart. I studied my books and I did my part. I took a full load of English and biology, and then I got a job serving coffee and tea. You go to 4 years of college, and what do you get? Another diploma and a mountain of debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I must stay. I owe my soul to Sally Mae. The collector kept calling and he taunted and lied, but I couldn't pay, no matter how much I tried. I owed so much, it felt like a joke. To pay back my loans, I'd forever be broke. You go to 4 years of college, and what do you get? Another diploma and a mountain of debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I must stay. I owe my soul to Sally Mae. Now they garnish my wages and the courts decree the debt follows you even after bankruptcy. Who will carry my burden when I'm dead and gone? For my student debt will still live on. You go to 4 years of college, and what do you get? Another diploma and a mountain of debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I must stay. I owe my soul to Sally Mae. Dreams can wither from neglect and delay, working jobs that you hate for a debt you can't pay. But if everyone who's worn the cap and gown stopped paying our debt, we'd take Sally Mae down. Then for 4 years of college, what could you get besides all that knowledge that you'll forget? How about a better world for you and for me, where higher education's universal and free? Where higher education is universal and free. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ben, for such a wonderful performance. We appreciate you and the People's Music Network, and hope to have you or others back with us for future programs. All right. So now I would like to introduce our guests for this evening, for the first segment tonight. But before I do that, I personally want to openly admit that I'm in nearly $90,000 in student debts, which also does not include my own credit card debt and also a student loan that my mother took out while I was in school, which I'm also currently paying off for her. So I'm more likely in nearly $110,000 of debt that I need to pay off to these companies or the government. So I'm hoping this conversation tonight can really bring about these issues about our relationship to debt, and we have some great organizers that will talk to us tonight about this. So without further ado, I will be introducing our panelists. Hannah Appel. Hannah is an associate professor of anthropology at UCLA, where she is also an associate director of the Institute on Inequality and Democracy with Ananya Roy. Hannah's research, writing, and organizing focus on the daily life of capitalism and the relationship between finance, debt, and collective action. Hannah is also a founding member and organizer with the Debt Collective and a mother of two. Her household has roughly $80,000 in student debt. And then our second panelist for this first segment is Jacques Laroche. Jacques is a computer scientist exploring the intersection of science, politics, and society. From 2011 to 2014, Jacques was involved with the Occupy movement and worked with Strike Debt in New York City to abolish debt across the nation. From 2014 to 2017, Jacques helped organize in Miami, Florida during the gestation of the Black Lives Matter movement. And currently he is serving as the IT and technical projects manager for Debt Collective. And now I will pass the floor to Hannah and Jacques.
Cool. Thank you so much, Dante. And hi, everybody. It's so wonderful to be here. So I'm going to go, Jacques and I are going to share this little part of the program. I'm going to go first, and then he's going to go second. And I'm just going to breeze through some information a little bit quickly with the idea that it's just going to be kind of a big overview or maybe review from some of you, and then we'll have some time in the breakout sessions in the Q&A to ask some more detailed questions. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share my computer sound, and I'm going to maximize this. Okay, can everybody see my screen? Yeah, all right. So as Dante said, I teach at the University of California, right? These are scenes from the 1960s, from public colleges in the California system, whether that was the UC system, the Cal State system, or the community college system like Merritt College, right? Merritt College, home of the Black Panther movement, right? It's where the Black Panther movement was gestated. You can also see the Brown Berets in the upper left. You can see anti-Vietnam war activism that was already intersectional, of course, with anti-racist activism, right? So why am I starting here? I'm starting in the 1960s in the UC system where I teach, because this entire system, the community college system as well, Merritt College, Oakland, California, was free. Public college used to mean tuition-free college. But the question, and the question that a lot of these protests were bringing up was, free college for whom? Who got access to these institutions? Who got access to the kinds of not only the sort of vibrant academic life, but also the job prospects, right, afforded by a degree from one of these schools? And the answer to that question was that it was the vast majority of people who got access to these free public schools were white men, right? And some white women. This explosion of protests that happened across the UC system, but at colleges and universities across the country in the 1960s and 70s, similar in some ways to our current moment. Part of these demands, I'm thinking particularly of the Brown Berets in the upper left, but lots of these demands were, we want access to these institutions too, right? We should have access to these institutions. And not only should we have access to these institutions, but these institutions should also teach our history, right? These institutions should teach Black studies. These institutions should teach Chicanx studies, right? These institutions should teach critical reads of the war that the US was very much involved in then, right? The imperial war against Vietnam, right? So these were demands in part of access to what were tuition-free public institutions that primarily catered to white people in general, white men in particular. Oops, let me get to where I can advance the slide. There it is. And then what happened? This man, Ronald Reagan, some of you may know him, lots of you are quite young and may not know him, was elected the governor of California, though he eventually went on to be the president of the United States in the 80s. So you'll see there's a little blurb there. In 1966, right? So in the wake of these protests that rocked not just the schools where I work, but across the country, the newly elected governor of California, Ronald Reagan, proposed that for the first time, the UC system should charge tuition, right? It was free before that, it was public. But Ronald Reagan runs on a platform. He says that charging tuition would, quote, get rid of undesirables. Who were the undesirables? Think of that slide that I just showed you before. Quote, those who are there to carry signs and not to study might think twice before they pay tuition. They might think twice about how much they want to carry a picket sign, end quote. The state, he announced in a speech the following year, should not be, quote, subsidizing intellectual curiosity. In other words, in response to critical thinking, in response to the resistance to imperialism, in response to the resistance to white supremacy that was blossoming in campuses all over the country, guess what happened? They said, nope, not free anymore. You want in, African-American people? You want in, Chicanx people? Okay, well, then you're gonna have to pay. This is a quintessential example of racial capitalism, which I'll talk more about, right? It is the intersection of an attempt to maintain white supremacy, right? That just white people get to go get high quality educations for free, trying to maintain white supremacy by using capitalism, right? That song we just heard, you need a wage to be able to pay for a school, and you need intergenerational wealth if there's actually going to be a serious tuition at these schools. So what happens when Ronald Reagan, he first makes the UC system, he succeeds in making the UC system have tuition. It takes a couple decades for this to spread across the nation, but by the 1990s, every formerly public school, I call them all formerly public schools because they are now all majority tuition funded, is no longer public. It is essentially private and it is paid for technically by tuition, but for most of us, that was student debt, right? And I'll talk about that most of us, the differentiated most of us in a minute. But you can see the graph, right? I know there are many like STEM people on here, which I love, many scientists. I am not a STEM person, but even I get that graph. That line just goes up and up and up and up and up. And now, of course, student debt stands at $1.6 trillion. And we saw where it originated. Don't push back, don't resist, don't challenge white supremacy, don't challenge imperial wars, don't challenge capitalism, because if you do, we will indebt you. And this is what has happened to our universities today. Okay, so student debt quadrupled between 2004 and 2019, stands today at $1.6 trillion. US students graduated from college with an average of $30,000 in debt. In 2018, it's a little bit higher. 2019, we don't have 2020 numbers, obviously, it's about 34,000 now. 1 million new people default on these debts every year. Not just every year 1 million people aren't paying, 1 million more people every year are unable to pay down those debts. So between 1964, right, the time that I'm talking about, and roughly today, 2019, the average annual cost of attending a 4-year public college or university, I'm not even talking about for-profits, I'm not even talking about private schools, soared by 3,819%. And that's in part because where did they start? They started at free. That's what public used to mean. But again, public was also code talk for public for white men and nobody else, right? So let's think about what public has meant historically before we kind of romanticize that past period, right? We're not trying to go back, we're trying to go forward to a new kind of free, which obviously we're here to talk about. Okay, so I've talked a little bit, I mentioned racial capitalism before. Wonderfully, that's how Dante and the Claudia Jones School has convened us here today. I also want to add another phrase to the mix, which is predatory inclusion and racial capitalism. So I'm going to talk about this. Student debt and household indebtedness more generally, whether that's medical debt, whether that's our housing debt, whether that's the debt we go into for our own incarceration, it is systemic, right? Which is to say it is a huge problem all across this country and beyond our borders, but it is not evenly distributed. This form of mass indebtedness has profoundly deepened pre-existing racial and gendered inequality in the United States. I'm focusing on the United States here. I just want to make that clear, but we can talk transnationally if we want to later. And so the concept here is predatory inclusion, right? Financial actors, in this case, the government is like, oh, you want to go to a public school? Okay, we'll include you, but on what terms? Financial actors offer needed services to Black and brown households, but on exploitative terms that limit or eliminate their long-term benefit. You want a college degree because you want to get a good job? Okay, come get a college degree, but now you're $45,000 in debt. And even if you get that good job, all of your wages are going to pay this back. So it limited and potentially eliminated their long-term benefit. What if I went to school because I wanted to do something good, social justice, become an organizer afterward, but I'm burdened with all this student debt, right? Then I say, oh, I should probably go get a job at this for-profit firm because I'm going to be able to pay that off more easily, right? Limiting or eliminating their long-term benefit. You're included, but it fucks you over. Excuse my language. Okay, so how do we understand specifically the racialized nature of these statistics, right? So 63% of white graduates from public schools borrow. They borrowed to go there. 81% of Black graduates borrow. 4 years, I have to change my capitalization. I apologize for that. I didn't realize I hadn't edited that. 4 years after graduating, Black graduates have average loan balances more than twice that of their white counterparts. And more than half of African-American households under 40 in this country have student debt. More than half. More than half of Black borrowers and 44% of Latinx borrowers are either in default or delinquent on their loans. So to think about why, we can think about discrimination in the labor market, right? Who gets paid more and less to do the same work? We can also think about gender and racial wage gaps, and of course, differential access to intergenerational wealth, right? So my family has student debt, but I can often go to my white mother, my white grandfather, my white uncle and say, I can't pay this off, but do you have $10,000, $20,000 you could give me, right? That is statistically speaking, far less likely, right, for families who do not have access to the kind of intergenerational wealth that whiteness has given to many of us for centuries in this country, and again, beyond this country's borders, significantly. So, student debt is a systemic condition. It is not the individual failure of those who made poor choices in a fair system, right? This is not about, oh, you actually need some financial literacy because you're not paying down your debt. No, 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 no. This is a systemic problem. This is not about individuals making bad choices. So too, racial capitalism is a systemic condition, right? The disproportionate burden of household debt that falls on Black, brown, and Native households. Sorry, my Zoom is blocking my ability to read my slides. There we go. The disproportionate burden of household debt on Black, brown, and Native households is not the individual failure of those who make poor choices in a fair system, right? That needs to be very clear, because so often the moral discourse that we hear is, oh, they don't have financial literacy, right? They need to learn to pay back their loans or deal with money better. No, 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 no. This is not what we're talking about. We are talking about systemic conditions in which race and capitalism overlap to disproportionately affect and marginalize Black, brown, Indigenous households. Okay. And if we're dealing with systemic conditions, then we need collective responses. Individual responses to systemic conditions can't get us to the scale of change that we need. So there's the question. What kind of collective responses are possible, right? We have to ask ourselves, if we agree that it's a systemic problem, and if we agree that systemic problems require collective solutions, then we have to ask, okay, well, what are those collective responses? And the Debt Collective, right, with whom Jacques and I organize, is here to say, debtors' unions. Not the only one, but certainly one of the collective responses we need, and perhaps one of the most important ones we need, in part because it's relatively unprecedented. So this is a picture actually taken in Florida at a organizing retreat that I think Jacques organized and facilitated. I wasn't there, but it's a fabulous picture with many of the Debt Collective's fabulous members and organizers. And I'll talk to you about the strike in just a minute. Okay, so how does a debtors' union work, right? I often find that this picture illustrates it well for people. So let's start with the words. Alone, our debts are a burden, right? We heard it in the song. The lender is calling me. The lender is sending me mail. I'm afraid to open the mail. I'm afraid to pick up my phone because I know it's Sally Mae. I know it's Great Lakes. I know it's the credit card company. I know it's the auto loan company, and I don't have the money. So in the picture, the big fish on top is the debt collector, and all of us little fishes are the debtors, and the debt collector is mean, and we're scattered and like, oh my God, we don't know what to do. Alone, our debts are a burden. But together, they make us powerful. If all of those little fish swim in formation, we can eat that big fish up. We are far more powerful than the debt collector, than the lenders, if we can organize as debtors, like workers organize as workers. And we can talk about that relationship between labor unions and debtors unions if we want in the Q&A. So if you don't want to take it from me, take it from one of the United States' foremost racial capitalists of the last century. This man is named John Paul Getty. He said, if you owe the bank $100, that's your problem, right? You're going to have to pay that back. But if you owe the bank $100 million, that's the bank's problem. Which is to say, if you owe the bank a ton of money, you actually have some power over the bank to renegotiate the terms of that loan. Now, I just told all of you that student debt alone stands at $1.6 trillion. That is a tremendous amount of leverage, a tremendous amount of power, if organized, over the bank, which in this case is the federal government. And we should probably talk about that distinction too. Happy to talk about that in the Q&A. So the Debt Collective in about 2014 piloted our first student debtors union. It was a group of people who held debts and sometimes degrees, though not always, right? Often when people realize how much debt they're running up, they drop out, right? So for a bunch of people who held debts from for-profit colleges. And so here are the group that called the Corinthian 15. They were the first 15 people who held debts from for-profit colleges to go public with their student debt strike. And they say to the Department of Education, to the loan servicers, to the Genesis Lending Company, to Corinthian, we have one thing to say: we owe you nothing. So we went public with this strike in about, gosh, I think it was 2015, although I don't have the timeline on me right now. And here, about 2 years later, we had actually a tremendous amount of success with this pilot debtors union. So you recognize a Facebook post, right? And here's Randy M saying, I got my money back from what I paid toward my federal loans. Not only did Randy get their money back, right? Payments that she had already made that she got sent back in that check, but all of the debt that she owed was erased. And to date, this particular strike has generated $1.5 billion in debt abolition. And in this moment, I'm using that word abolition really intentionally, and I'm also happy to talk about why. One of the things I want to really hammer on here is at the Debt Collective, we don't use the word debt forgiveness, because then it's like we're being forgiven for something that we did wrong. Definitely debt cancellation for sure, or debt abolition. And again, we can talk about why. So not only has this strike won $1.5 billion in debt abolition, but it also has written legislation. So many of you may know or have seen Ilhan Omar standing here in the front. Just behind her to the left, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and to her right, Pramila Jayapal. Most of you probably do not know debt collective striker Pamela Hunt to her left, or debt collective striker Thomas Gokey to her right. Because of the work of the nation's first student debtors union, Ilhan Omar and Pramila Jayapal wrote federal legislation. They proposed federal legislation that's called College for All. And it has later come to be associated with Bernie Sanders, who as a senator, their representatives, Bernie Sanders as a senator and eventually a presidential candidate, took it up. So what does College for All do? It eliminates all outstanding debt, all $1.6 trillion. It eliminates tuition and fees at all public 2- and 4-year schools, community colleges, trade schools. It also gives money to HBCUs, right? Historically Black colleges and universities, and tribal colleges. And it reverses, for those of you who are in academia, the drift to adjunct faculty, right? The drift to precarious teaching labor. College for All is legislation that has already been written. There is already proposed legislation to wipe out all the debt and to make college free, right? So let's just know that. This isn't a pipe dream. It's real. It's already written into federal legislation. So I know I'm running short on time and Jacques needs some time, but because of the success of this student debt strike, Senator Sanders, Pramila Jayapal, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar invited debt collective strikers to announce the legislation. And I won't play this video right now, but this is Pamela Hunt announcing sort of the fact that she is a member of the nation's first student debt strike. And while her debt hasn't been abolished, so many others have, et cetera. It's a wonderful video. If any of you want it, I'll send it to you. So I just want to kind of end on a couple notes about full debt cancellation and racial justice, right? Never to lose sight of the racial capitalism aspect of the student debt problem and of household debt more generally. So this is a quote from a wonderful article by Derek Hamilton and Naomi Zudi. And they say, Derek Hamilton is a very well-known economist who's been very outspoken on the issue of student debt and racial capitalism, or student debt and race in particular. Quote from their article: only full cancellation, not partial cancellation, right? Not no cancellation, but only full cancellation of student debt completely protects the vulnerabilities of Black students and students in general, while at the same time establishing higher education as a universal right and offering restitution to all those who have had to rely on debt finance. So that's from the Derek Hamilton and Naomi Zudi article. And then just one more from Marshall Steinbaum, another economist who's been very outspoken on this issue. Whereas once student debt was a marker of relative privilege, right, confined to high status degree holders, and you hear this a lot, oh, that's only law students that have it. Oh, that's only medical students that have it. Steinbaum says it is increasingly a mark of a relative lack of privilege. That's an older argument that typifies an older moment, right, before the 1990s. It is not true anymore. The more debt cancellation there is, the more racial wealth inequality is reduced. And if you remember those statistics I gave, right, Black households under 40, over 50% of them have student debt, right? You can see the truth in these analyses. So I also want to point, I hope many of you know the Red Nation. It's a really fabulous indigenous socialist organization here in the US. The Red Nation came out with a series of policy platforms called the Red Deal, in intentional dialogue with the Green New Deal. And I just want to point out that for them, free education for everyone is right up there, right at the top. And that's the link at the bottom. You can find them at the Red Nation. And of course, many of us joined in the streets throughout this entire summer and may still be there, but there was the Movement for Black Lives organized an incredible week of action, which gave us specific issues to think about and specific things to message every day. It was in early June. And here is Wednesday, the Movement for Black Lives Week of Action, Wednesday. We demand the federal government provide direct cash payments, rent cancellation, mortgage cancellation, a moratorium on utility and water shutoffs, and a cancellation of student, medical, and other forms of debt. We demand long-term economic solutions like a universal basic income. And they also then on Tuesday demanded free public colleges. And importantly, school isn't only free if it's tuition free. Public schools should also be police-free spaces, right? So in their Tuesday day of action, it was all about cops off campus, cops off of all public education institutions. And at the UC system, we have a large abolition campaign that we're about to launch publicly on 9/1. Campuses have to be tuition free and cop free. So my last slide, and I'll end it here. All of you, regardless of whether you have debts from for-profit colleges or any kind of colleges, there is an ongoing student debt strike that we are continually trying to organize and activate, but you can sign up, you can learn more about it right here, strike.debtcollective.org. And I will stop there. Thanks so much for your attention.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm just gonna take the mic now. That was amazing, Hannah. I love that. It's really so good. And you also saved me the space to get into some other topics as well. So we'll get back into the details of the strike and what the Debt Collective is doing in the Q&A and everything like that. But for now, I just want to do a couple of things. I want to talk about, it's basically, I have a two-part presentation where at the beginning, I want to talk about my story, just my background, how I got into student debt, what I experienced in this whole financialized, debt-financed education system, racist debt-financed education system, and how I got involved in the Debt Collective. And then the second part, I just want to zoom out and take a wider view and look at the connections between all of these problems that we're dealing with, the debt problems and all of the other problems in the US, and basically imperialism, colonialism, and how it's connected to racism and the international aspects of that. So basically, who am I? Again, my name is Jacques Laroche. I'm the son of Haitian immigrants who came to the States back in the 80s. And they basically beat the odds and got this American dream, quote unquote, where I think they got it actually at the tail end of any possibility of even achieving it, no matter how slim. I think it's basically impossible to get it now, but that's a different discussion. And speaking of discussions, whenever I talk about all of these issues with my parents, the thing that they notice right away, the thing that jumps out at them is the crushing debt that all of us carry as as we try to better ourselves and go to school and try to do the quote unquote right thing. And that didn't exist before, the same way that Hannah was pointing out so poignantly earlier. So like it was said before, I'm basically the Debt Collective Technical Projects Manager, but how did I get into that? So let's see, back in, I'll take a step back from that. So first of all, where am I? Because this is also part of my story. So I'm currently in Serbia, 6 hours ahead of Eastern Standard Time. Serbia is in Eastern Europe. And why I'm talking about this will hopefully all come into context as things that are all connected in threads. Basically, a lot of people will think, okay, well, what is this Haitian guy doing in Serbia? And there are a lot of things that we have in common. So first of all, 1804, which is the year that the Haitian Revolution ended and we got ourselves our independence and forged our own path and got our own way forward and took our own destiny. Basically, 1804 is also the year of the first Serbian uprising against the Ottomans, because they were under the Turks, enslaved under the Ottomans for 500 years. In 1835, the Constitution, the Serbian Constitution, also stated that any slave who sets foot in Serbian lands becomes free. So there's a lot in common. Not only that, but even the word Slav, which is connected to the word slave, it comes from the Slavic people. So there's just a whole lot in common. And let's get into just take a sideways step and move over to my history of debt. So basically, my parents taught me that I should never be in debt. I think a lot of parents teach their kids this. Some parents don't, but a lot of parents do. And the reason they did this is because they understood that if you are in debt, that you are beholden to someone. And they always told me that if you get in debt, if you can only do it if you have to, because the ends justifies the means, and you should do it for as little time as possible. But the thing is, capitalism and neoliberalism had other plans. So basically, what happened was, as everyone else in the US system, there was a heavy indoctrination about education, that you had to go into debt and get higher education to be able to do anything, right? To get yourself into a path that was not going to be riddled by poverty or hardship, you had to get a higher education. If that means that you have to get a burden of debt along the way, then so be it. That's what you have to do, right? So basically, everybody's set up to accept this from the beginning, right? So this is what I did as well, right? Got a mountain of debt, went to undergrad, then went to grad school, piled on even more debt, and there's a story, right? The thing about this debt is it's also racialized, as Hannah was saying. So I'm not going to go into all of the details that Hannah has already picked up on. I didn't. That was great. But definitely the disadvantage is also the racial wealth gap is what forces us to take on these debts that a lot of other families and households don't have to get into. Also, that 80% of the So we got 80% of the Black students in undergrad are taking out student loans as compared to their counterparts. And we're less likely to be hired afterwards as well. So there's this double whammy, like on the front and on the back end. So I went to grad school under all of this context, right? And had a lot of racist experiences in grad school as well, and ended up dropping out and have about $30,000 in debt, probably a lot more now. And the thing is, I want to declare that I will never pay for this, ever. And not only will I not, it's not that I'm just not paying for the debt, I'm not paying for the humiliation, right? I'm not paying for something that was forced onto me or all of us as debtors as a way to say that this is the only way that you can survive. This is the only way that you can thrive in society, is to take on all these debts and take on this burden. We'll never pay. So fast forward to my debt activism. When Occupy started off in 2011 in New York, I was there, went out to Zuccotti Park and all of this stuff, and saw all of these signs for the working groups, for all the things that you could get involved in, and it was really overwhelming because there's a basically it's a litany, a list of all of the things that are wrong in the U.S. and it's very hard to say, you know, I want to work on this because there's so much going on. But the thing where I ended up was with strike debt, and the reason is because it resonated with me because of my past as a Haitian. So I understood acutely the power of debt because it had been used against our country in the past and in the present. So basically, the Debt Collective, I just want to talk a little bit about the Debt Collective and then get more into what this means internationally with the debt and other aspects. The Debt Collective and the debtor unionism is something that is very powerful because if you saw the photo of all the debtors, the Corinthian 15, this is a force that transcends, that cuts across racial lines, that cuts across even some class lines, and connecting everybody in this way and having an understanding of what the problem is at the root is one of the strongest tools that we have to dismantle the system and to really get out to at the bottom of what's going on with this problem in the United States. So I just want to switch gears now and take a larger view, step back, and look at the international aspect of all of this. And I want to talk about why I keep talking about imperialism and colonialism. And it's because I am a product of imperialism and colonialism through and through. So basically, I'm a product of imperialism because let's just want a little bit of history here. So when the U.S. invaded Haiti in 1915, they invaded Haiti in 1915, and through the central banks, they stole all of our gold and sent it to the central bank in New York. And after that, they propped up a puppet government that basically was a dictatorship to hold on to American interests and to prop up American interests on the island. Now, what they didn't expect was that we, being Haitians, who wouldn't be down with that. And basically what happened is when everybody in the island found out, after this coup, the coup leaders just killed about 167 people that were part of the former regime. Just everyone who was in jail, who was part of the old regime, was killed. And when people found out about that on the island, they basically stormed the palace. They found the new president who had become the president through the coup, and basically tore him to shreds. They threw him over the balcony of, he was hiding in the French embassy, and threw him over the balcony for the people to have at him. So when the Navy, the US Navy, found out about this, they invaded the island and they occupied the island for 19 years. So from 1915 to 1934. At this time, this was the Iraq of the early 20th century. It was talked about this way in the newspapers of the day. All our resistance was deemed insurgency, the same way that Iraqi resistance was deemed insurgency. Whereas all we were doing is resisting invasion, humiliation, oppression, subjugation, and occupation. So I am the product of this imperialism, because what this did was it pushed us off of our path, pushed us off of our path of self-determination, and severely disrupted our wealth at the time in a way that we never recovered from. I'm also the product of colonialism, obviously because Haiti was a colony, and my ancestors were there to prop up the French Empire and to make it one of the most powerful countries in the world. But specifically because after the revolution in 1804, later on in 1825, the French came back to the island after they had been roundly beaten. They came back to the island with a contingent of battleships. And what they did is they descended on the island and they gave us an ultimatum. They said, either you pay us for everything that we've lost since you've taken back your own destiny, or we will invade you and invade you and invade you and invade you until we subdue you. So unfortunately, when a bulldozer, a tank, and a boatload full of troops comes to your door, most people would buckle. That's what the government at the time did. So what they did is they said yes to this extortion, and they paid back this debt, is what it was. It was basically reparations for the French, but it was a debt. And the debt lasted from 1825 to 1947. We were paying this debt to the French for 122 years. A total of $21 billion was given from the Haitian government to the French in this time period. So I'm also the product of imperialism, an imperialism that, again, set us off of our course, robbed us of our destiny, robbed us of our free will and our self-determination, and irrevocably changed the way that our history would have actually worked out if it wasn't for that. So with these two examples, great. I think a lot of people might say, okay, why should I care, right? This is just hypothetical. This is just affecting this guy. This is, some special case, a Haitian guy, I don't know, whatever. But what we have to understand is that our struggles, whether they be against debt or whether they be against violence of the state, are simply mirror images of imperialist and colonial policies. Hands down, they're mirror images of imperialist and colonial policies. So for example, the whole point, let's get into a couple of examples here at home, right? The whole point of the domestic system of debt, right? So the debt that we take on as citizens, whether we want to go to take on higher education or whether we want to do X, Y, and Z, the whole point of these debts is to turn citizens into indentured servants, right? So you end up going to work to make money to pay your creditors. You have no time, you have no energy, no motivation, no spiritual exploration or political life. God forbid that you go to a protest, maybe you'll lose your job, and then you can't pay back your creditors. You are relegated to indentured servitude, right? And then as with the small, it is with the large, right? These are mirror images of one another, right? So the whole point of international systems of debt, right, on the large scale, the whole point of these international systems of debt that are imposed by the IMF, the World Bank, and other capitalist institutions is to turn sovereign nations into enslaved entities. It's also the same thing, right? So as a country that is in debt, You can't pay for your development of your own infrastructure, right? You can't subsidize your own. You can't afford healthcare for your people. You can't afford higher education for your citizens, even if it's paid through by taxes, even if it's publicly funded. You can't do that because all of your wealth, whether it be through taxes, your natural resources, or anything, or what have you, has to go to pay the foreign creditors, right? So, as with the small, it is with the large mirror imagery. Therefore, what we need to remember in our struggles against debt, against injustice, against the system, is that when we hear about, a debt crisis in Greece, right, and that they're fighting international lenders, we need to understand, or when we hear that there's a quote unquote failing economy in Jamaica, right, that requires IMF loans so that they can get back on track, quote unquote, right? We should understand that this is just another version of our aunt who got a predatory home loan and lost her house in the 2008 crash, right? Or our friend who owes $20,000 in credit card debt because she has to use that for food and housing, right? We must understand that these struggles are inextricably linked, right? That they're one and the same, and that they're examples of an oppressive system that what it does is it perfects itself in one area and then replicates itself in another. So it's done abroad, it's brought at home, it's brought at home, it's turned abroad. So I just want to quickly look at a few other examples, and then that will be that. So I want to talk about also that the colonial aspect of this, right? So the entire U.S. model that's used against Black people, not just black and brown and undesirables. This is a very strong word, and thank you, Hannah, for bringing that up. Right? It's basically the undesirables of the country. The entire model that's used against the undesirables is colonial. Right? So the way that the police forces contain and control neighborhoods of Black and brown people and other undesirables, Native Americans, is the same way that military troops hold territory in colonial wars and occupations, right? There's a reason that police forces across the US receive training by Israeli forces, right? And there's no difference between occupied Palestinian land and Overtown in Miami, Camden in New Jersey, or Watts in LA, right? So it's basically under this lens of imperialism and colonialism that it becomes easier to see these parallels. So, for example, it becomes obvious that when we talk about qualified immunity, right, which is basically the way that the U.S. shields police from prosecution. When we talk about qualified immunity, and when we look at the way that the International Criminal Court by the UN is used, right? When these institutions are used against the enemies of the U.S., they're legitimate. They're great, right? When the U.S. courts goes after somebody that the U.S. deems their enemy, then it's fantastic. If it's used against a cop, it's not great. If the International Criminal Court is used when they first say, okay, we're going to investigate U.S. military personnel for war crimes, then all hell breaks loose. Then the International Criminal Court is going to be sanctioned by the U.S. Any prosecutors from the International Criminal Court that are going to the U.S. will have their visas revoked. It's all no holds barred. Everything is out the window. So this is how we have to see these two things, and all of this was understood during the Civil Rights era by Huey Newton of the Black Panther Party, by Kwame Ture, or also known as Stokely Carmichael, and also by Martin Luther King, right? Especially towards the end of his life when he came out against the war. So this is not new. All we have to do is reclaim this legacy. And that's what I've got. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jacques and Hannah. Rob, can you let me start my video? It's not letting me. All right, there you go. All right, so thank you so much for that, great presentation from Hannah and your personal story, Jacques. Yeah, it's important that we understand all these interconnections, interlocking oppressions, and imperialism, and we got to have some sort of like international solidarity when it comes to talking about these things as well. And I like how you brought up, like, the IMF and the World Bank, how you brought up the example of Greece, and we always talk about how Greece is in debt in these other countries, and how that, and you just brought up how the relationship is like how someone just lost their home through a predatory loan here in the U.S. So thank you so much. So now we're going to open up for a Q&A, a brief Q&A, and then we'll move into the second segment of the event. So actually, I had a first question, so we can just get started, and then there are two questions that we have in the chat that I'll follow up with. So the question I had, which either you can answer. So Hannah, you brought up the idea of debt abolition. So I wanted to, intersect or interconnect, the movement around PIC abolition, or the prison industrial complex abolition. And then on top of that, related to that question, is there a relationship between student debt and the expansion of police on campuses? And one example that I think of right now is the COLA for All movement in the UC system, at UC Santa Cruz, where these graduate students went on a wildcat strike for a cost of living adjustments. And, what is it, like almost 70 TAs got fired for withholding grades early this year before the pandemic. And they were like violently, I'm not sure if they were beaten by police, but there was a lot of violence towards the protesters on campus and the graduate students that were on strike, withholding grades and doing other direct actions. So I'm just curious if you can comment on that.
Yeah, I can. So I hear two very related questions, which is like, what does it mean to say debt abolition intentionally, given that, kind of abolition of the prison industrial complex movements that we have been seeing around us for so long. And also a question of, how do we understand the relationship between tuition or sort of political economies of universities and cops? So I'm just really quickly going to answer that first question by sharing my screen again, if that's okay. So this is a picture of a window. Critical Resistance is a wonderful longtime abolition organization. This is a picture of one of their windows at their Oakland, California headquarters. So it says, abolition is a strategy and a vision for a world without prisons and policing. And often this is what many of us might think of when we think of abolition, right? To abolish something, to get rid of something, often police, borders, prisons, whatever. But here's the window right next to it. Abolition is the presence of housing, healthcare, and life free from state violence. And Ruthie Gilmore, a dear friend and mentor to me, right, when she presents abolition, Professor Ruthie Gilmore, New York CUNY professor and also one of the co-founders of Critical Resistance, when she presents abolition, she always says, abolition is the world in which prisons aren't the answers to the real problems. And the real problems are the absence of housing, the absence of healthcare, the absence of education, the absence of a thriving environment, or the presence of those things for white people. Right? So I think it's really important to think about abolition as both a world without police and prisons and a world with. And notice that education is right there, a world with accessible education. So when I say debt abolition, I mean it precisely in this dual sense: without debt, abolish the debt, but with free college on the back end. Because if you abolish debt and then you don't make college free on the back end, we get ourselves into the whole same problem all over again. So that's what I would say about abolition. And then the second question about the COLA strike, that COLA is the acronym for a cost of living adjustment strike. It's actually a strike that spread to graduate student workers across the UC system. And actually very early on in the cost of living adjustment strike, one of the greatest chants that was always on every campus, certainly at UCLA, was cops off campus, COLA in my bank account, cops off campus, COLA in my bank account. And everybody, not everybody, but the kind of chattering liberal classes were like, what do cops have to do with what you get paid, right? But exactly as Dante just said, as soon as those Santa Cruz workers went out to the streets and said, we will no longer work for poverty wages, this is ridiculous, UC Santa Cruz not only said, oh, well, we can't afford to pay you a reasonable wage, But what we can afford to do is a $300,000 a day contract with militarized policing to shut all of you down. They paid militarized campus police $300,000 a day to squash that strike. Don't tell me you can't afford a wage increase if you can afford $300,000 a day. So that's precisely why cops off campus has to be an argument. Free, right? Free college isn't free if there are cops on campuses. So to have actually free education, it needs to be free school, but it also needs to be freedom school. So that's how I'd answer that.
Jacques, did you have anything to add, or?
No, I think that's fantastic. Thank you.
All right. So we have a few questions here. One from YouTube. Justin Stanley asks, how should we answer people who say things like, I'm white and my family is poor, and things along that line? And another, tokenized thing that, I'm a scientist. There's a big Black engineering convention coming up, I think, in next week or something. And it's along the lines of the same question. Like, there's a whole workshop at this conference that, I'm 26 years old and I paid off my student debt and want to find out how I did it, type thing. And so I'm just curious, so one question is, I'm white and my family is poor. So like those people that, deflect easily. And then there's like this liberalized or assimilationist idea where like, anyone can like, own a house or pay off their debt if they do the right thing type thing. So I wonder if one of y'all can answer that.
Yeah, I would love to. So I think one thing that's missing nowadays is, this is why I love the Debt Collective, because I feel like we're one of the few organizations that's doing this true cross-class solidarity-based, building of people against this system. So when I hear somebody say something like, "I'm poor, I'm white, and my family is poor," or XYZ, the first thing that comes to mind for me is I think of Fred Hampton, right? So I remember reading this really great book about it was called like Black Power and White Honkies and Black Power or something like this, right? And you open up the book and the first page, there's this picture and there's two men standing at attention with their backs. The picture is taken from their back, and one has the really like stereotypical like leather jacket with the beret and everything, Black Panther, and then next to him is a white dude with like a jean jacket shirt that's like ripped at the shoulder, and he's got like the Dixie like flag on his, and they're together. Right. So when I hear this, I'm white and poor. Yeah, of course you are. Right. Statistically, there are more poor white people in the US than there are Blacks. And that's the problem, right? This isn't just kind of like, and you got something else. And no. What we have to do is recognize who our common enemy is. And our common enemy is the person that is pushing us down and pitting us against one another and making, this institution that used to be free, not free anymore for all of us, right? Usually we're getting the shit end of the stick. I like to call us the canary in the coal mine. Right, so watch us, right? Because y'all are gonna get the same shit. It's just wait, it's coming, right? So what I would do is talk to that person and on a human level, right, and explain that the people in the Appalachians are shit up shit's creek, and we have to work together. There's lots of there's more welfare mothers who are white than Black. Like we have to. Why is this happening when there is all this wealth? You could take 5%, 10% of the discretionary military budget. I would slash all of it, right? But if you just took even 3% of it, right, you could pay for everything, right? No, don't even get me started with the Black budget, right? So that's what I would say. All this other stuff though is just is troll talk. But there's some real commonalities, and we have to cross those lanes and cross those boundaries and work together to fight against the capitalists at the top of the system.
All right, so we're a little bit over time. We will have another brief Q&A after the next speaker, so there can be questions for Jacques and Hannah later on. And we see that there's still 2 more for them, so we can answer those later on. So I'm gonna pass the floor to Wes, who will be emceeing the second half of tonight.
Great, thanks, Dante. Could I just get my video? Cool, excellent. Thanks, Rob. So cool, thanks, y'all. My name's Wes. I use he, they pronouns. I'm an organizer with the DC branch of the Debt Collective, and it is just, like a breath of fresh air to be with folks who are here struggling together and to hear some amazing presentations. And so on the subject of amazing presentations, it's my honor to introduce our next speaker, Zillah F. Wesley II. She is from Washington, D.C. She's one of the chairs of the D.C. Poor People's Campaign, National Call for Moral Revival. She's also a Moore national organizer. Zillah graduated in May 2020 with a political science degree with a concentration in global studies from the University of the District of Columbia. Zillah wants to work to help build a beloved community, and we are just so enriched by her presence, and it's my honor to turn the floor over to Zillah. So thanks, Zillah.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Yes, I'm going to share my screen now as well. I have a little something. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the panelists in the first half. Like, it fired me up, and we're going to touch on some of the same stuff a little bit. But first, the Poor People's Campaign, a National Call for Moral Revival, we, let's see, I haven't done a presentation in a minute. So we are rooted in struggle and from the beginning. Like this picture of Johnny Tillman and the Welfare Rights Campaign started off the Poor People's Campaign. Also, this is one of the times during Resurrection City. But in between that, this is when Martin really started after his Vietnam speech, and a lot of people turned their back on him because that's also not discussed, of the people who were like, you want to unite the class, you want to unite the races to really try to topple this system. That's when he was feeling alone. This was his dream, and he gathered people from all over. His wife was involved, and then he was assassinated. And usually when you try to do collective work to bring down the system, you are messing up this, you are like a pebble in the shoe. So you have to go, usually. Next, Poor People's Campaign, the campaign's goal, we're trying to shift the narrative to talk about fusion, how we need to do fusion organizing. Everyone needs to work together. Like, a lot of people, I've been organizing with them since 2017. A lot of people have come and gone because, they're just not ready to fusion organize. Cause but for real, for us to start breaking down this shit work, like how the person just said the question before, I'm white and I'm poor. Yeah, there's a lot of white and poor people. There's a lot of there's a lot of poor and Black people, and so on and so forth. There's 140 million poor and low income people in this country. So yeah, you are. And that's okay, because we're taught and we're conditioned that, well, I'll get to that later. But so yeah, one of our things is to shift the narrative, build power. And right now we're mobilizing for the election because we are poor and low income people. We could have turned the election, but with voter suppression and even with students, how student ID laws have changed, all of that around the country. But one thing I like to do in Poor People's Campaign fashion, and we already had music, but we also, because Miss Lucy is our theomusicology, theomusicologist. So we are, I just want to bring in a little song, a little Poor People's Campaign in here, just for about 30 seconds. So let me just do that real quick. I'm not afraid. I am not afraid. I will die for liberation. I know I was made. I am not afraid. I am not afraid. Perfect. Next, this is some of the stuff that we are challenging within the Poor People's Campaign: systematic racism, poverty, the war economy, and especially the war economy is directly linked to me and to student debt sometimes, because people join the military to get a free college education. Also ecological devastation and this national distortive narrative, because that's one narrative. If we go to college, we'll end up with a perfect life and we'll be okay. And we'll buy houses and have children. So how the Poor People's Campaign sees the poor, it's right here. 140 million poor, low income people. And then we have the breakdown: children, adults, Native American, Black. I mean, you can even see the numbers, because for Black people to always be on the TV for being poor, we're not, compared to the number, if you look at the numbers, because Black people in America, 13%. So it's but it's all in how the numbers are given to us and conditioned in us to really see that, I'm just talking that Black people are the problem and you're poor because, you're not where you need to be, or you grew up in the hood, or you didn't go to the right schools. But here's another way that we see the poor. 16 million people work for less than $15 an hour. You can't live off of that anywhere. People who are underinsured, 87 million, and this is even shown right now where the conditions that we're living in with COVID-19. It's just ridiculous. 700 people were dying before COVID-19 due to being low income or poor, and now it's double that. So I put these two pictures up because, one, you see the senators in Tibet, and I think my screen is covering it, but what worries the senators is that people are getting into step. So building debt collectives like this are key and very important to really mobilizing and galvanizing and changing the narrative and changing the system every day. Because if we get together as students of all ages, we can really change it and do what we need to do to get free education. Because Hannah's presentation, the fact, that blew my mind. I never knew that California's education system was free. I'm always learning. And yet again, Ronald Reagan is somebody who really has jacked up this system. Also, this other photo is where the other poster that's done by some great dope artists for the Poor People's Campaign. All you wanted to do was go to college and get a better life. But now you have post-traumatic stress disease, or all sorts of other issues that come with being in war and the moral injury of that. So education, it says it right here, it's been unequal since we were in kindergarten. The money that's put in, because if you look at DC, they are investing $47 million in housing, but they're not investing it in the communities that already exist, because the Poor People's Campaign works with the Brooklyn Managed Tenant Association. And that's one thing that we're struggling with and we're talking about, is the fact that if you invest just $1 million within that community, it could change it already. But they'll rather just wipe people out and start again than work on the people who are there. So some of these statistics are dear to me, because I went to the University of the District of Columbia, and it's a school where the average student there is 35. And they've been in this world, because even for myself, I thought getting a degree would help me out. And yes, it helps me out because it's I'm legit now, but it doesn't really necessarily help me out. It's put me in debt, but I still know the same stuff I knew going in as I'm going out. But also I see how, the college system is working. So that's also a thing. But the average single mother, 88% in student poverty. Student debt, we already got those numbers before, 1 point, and that was in 2008. 18, sorry, excuse me. And even just look at the numbers, because, you know, in 2015, you know, that's how 25,000, I'm sorry, so yeah, and then it's 2,000, and then now that's like 2.5 times since 1968. And also in 1968, because that was the year the Poor People's Campaign started, that was the year where there was a lot of uprisings globally around the world. And a lot of people forget that, because France had student uprisings, so did China, a lot of other areas that people forget. Because the civil rights movement was a global movement, but people never sometimes make those connections due to the fact of what we're taught. Like how we're taught is like, it was just Martin Luther King, you know, by himself, having a dream that everyone wants to hold hands and drink Coca-Cola. And like, that's not the world really that he was trying to discuss, because as his political understanding of the system changed, so did his thinking. Because that's why I recommend, if anyone hasn't heard his Beyond Vietnam speech, I feel like you need to listen to that. And also, like, a lot of graduates now, this is what we're walking into, is we're walking into a pandemic where it just made the conditions that are already out there worse. Because all this shit was happening already, but COVID-19 just exacerbated it. Also is like helping with the wealth divide even more. It is helping with the digital, I mean, it's like just showing the digital divide even more. So like, how can we find jobs and do what we need to do? And like, you know, people are applying for unemployment. So here's some stuff like, so United Medical, they do a lot of the insurance here in DC. And during COVID-19, they doubled their profits to $6.6 billion because people are not going to the hospital fearing for their safety and the safety of their families. Also this eviction, rent, and even with that, because even like I've talked to a few of my friends who are now depressed and they're feeling less than adequate due to the fact that, you know, they graduated college, got their degree, got their job, but then they got let go from their job. And now they cannot afford rent, so they're back at home. So having that reset and the evictions, and it's going to be a crisis that's coming up, and it's not coming up soon, it's slowly trickling. It's trickling, and people aren't trying to stop it or do anything to do anything for it. But it's going to get bad. And next slide. So yeah, this one, yeah, like student debt is a fucking crisis as far as I'm concerned. We are being chokehold and handled because what they want us to do is do this American dream that, you know, to buy a house and do all that type of stuff. But even if you do programs, you know, you can't like, because for Teach, there goes my timer, for Teach for America, like you can't join a union. So, you know, stuff like that. So it's things that can protect us that we can't even do. And now people who have like master's degrees are working for places just to make money, but even that money is not helpful. Thank you. Sorry if I ran through that a little fast, but yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Zilla. So we're going to go into a brief.
One more thing.
Oh, please do. Please do.
Okay. Yeah. And also like with this capitalistic system, we are all expendable and people need to realize that. Like, they don't care if we all die. They will replace us with machinery or whatever they're going to do. And we need to realize and work together as a collective of whatever that looks like, because I know I'm not expendable and any sibling on this call is not expendable. We are all humans. We are all beautiful creatures that want to survive and thrive and live the best life. And there's another system out here that we can do. We just got to believe and try to help shift this country. Thank you, Wes.
No, thank you. So inspiring. Yes, we're getting some amazing reactions in the chat. So that is a testament to your presentation. So we're going to go into a brief. Thanks, Rob. We're going to go into a brief second period of Q&A. And then we're going to go into breakout sessions where we can discuss some of the lingering questions we have, as well as some other topics. And then we're going to return to a third section of Q&A. So if an outstanding question from before isn't quite answered yet, luckily, hopefully we'll be able to get to it in the next round. So Zilla, this is a question for you. What are some of the strategies that the Poor People's Campaign is using to focus on this question of organizing the working class around this issue of debt abolition and tuition-free school?
Yeah, talking about it, because we have students, we have student fellows who are giving them like organizing experience to help take back to their campus to organize. However, also just by talking about it, because a lot of people don't talk about their student debt at all, because there's just still like, everything's cupcakes and rainbows over here. But like, no, you are like, I know I'm struggling, because like that's the first thing you do when you graduate is you have to do your loan papers. And like before, like I don't even technically have my cap and gown yet because they were returned that, but like I'm not getting anything for that due to COVID-19. So it's like one of those things where it's like just talking about it is like the first thing about it. Also, working with groups like Why I'm Here Right Now, like we all need to hear each other, work with each other, collaborate with each other to build collectives, because like doing this alone is not going to get us anywhere. So
true. We're going to go into another question, and which might take us to our time to do breakout sessions. This is open to anyone, Zilla, Jacques, or Hannah. It's a great question. This question comes in and is asking, does the movement to abolish all debt also include debt that is incurred due to home buying? So not just student debt, but also home buying and going into debt to pay rent. Is that included? And if so, how? So anyone can take that away. Oh, and Jacques is answering in the chat, but if anyone wants to answer it vocally, please do.
I can say a little something if that's helpful. This is Hannah. Can I take off my own video? No. Okay, that's fine. So the first thing I want to say, because there was rent debt in the question and Zilla ended her wonderful presentation with the looming eviction crisis, right? So yeah, there are 30 million families, 30 million, not necessarily families, 30 million households across the United States that are at imminent risk of eviction right now. And needless to say, that it's not, that kind of vulnerability does not happen equally across racial groups in this country. Although, as people have said and said again, of course, there are many white poor people who are also at risk, and that's important to acknowledge. And so the Debt Collective is working with the LA Tenants Union and with Tenants Together to make a tool that allows people who are at risk of eviction to file something called an unlawful detainer answer. I'm not going to get into the details, but basically, in order to stay in your home, even if there is relatively progressive legislation in place that has, for example, a COVID moratorium in place, landlords can still file an eviction. And what a tenant has to do is has to actually answer that eviction in a legal process, but say, hey, there's this law that protects me, right? So the Debt Collective is actually working on an app to simplify that process. It's going to come out first in Spanish and English, but will ideally eventually be up in other languages. And I'd love to talk to people about it. At first, it's just going to be in Los Angeles County, but we're hoping to expand it. But in terms of the broader question, which is like, does this movement to abolish debt include housing debt? Yes, in theory, it includes housing debt, although I would say this is not actually a movement to abolish debt. It's like saying labor unions is a movement to abolish labor. In some ways, that's true. But in other ways, it's a movement to enable the right kinds of labor, right? Unalienated labor, labor that gives us an incredible life, a living wage, access to all the things that Zilla is talking about, right? Access to housing, access to healthcare, access to a thriving environment, right? So labor unions don't try to get rid of labor altogether. So too, I would say, debtors unions do not necessarily try to get rid of debt altogether, but rather to have debt relationships that are socially productive, right? There will be things that we have to pay for over time, right? Which is to say that if private property is going to go on in this country, I personally don't think it should, but I know I'm in the minority position there, right? people will probably take out home mortgages. But if those home mortgages are racist, are given on racist terms, if those home mortgages are predatory insofar as you're sold a bill of goods about a low interest rate, but then it balloons later, a debtors union can step in, think of the 2008-2009 crisis, and say, you will not bail out the banks, you will bail out us, right? That's not necessarily getting rid of all mortgage debt in that case. It's talking about what happens in a crisis and who has power. Debtors need to have power to set the terms of our own conditions, right? Now, will that get rid of a lot of debt and make goods publicly available again? In other words, free and not debt financed? Absolutely. But does it necessarily get rid of all debt relationships, which are essentially just the idea that you pay over time? In my opinion, not necessarily. So I'll just throw that out there.
Yeah, I would just also throw in that, let's see, who was it? That was Chiniere, I believe. Check out, come and visit debtcollective.org and join the collective, and you'll have access to our forums. And inside of the forums, we have people talking about all different types of debt, including home related debt. And you can get answers from there. We have people on staff who will take time, to be able to answer questions. And, in the end, maybe you can become, somebody, an expert in this field and help other people as well and pay it forward, because that's what part of the collective is about, right? To be able to get help and also help others when you can. So I would really suggest to visit debtcollective.org, and I'll put the link into the chat. And then that way, you can get on the road to figuring out what can be done about these home loans that you're talking about.
Cool. I think without any further ado, we'll probably move into the breakout session piece of our time together tonight. We will have some prompting questions, but this is also a space to discuss any of the lingering questions that have been answered, as well as to share and connect and listen right over the common yoke that is debt, though it may fall on us unevenly. So we'll be moving into that now. Just want to say thank you to our presenters for their, just truly very well-rounded and fantastic perspectives on different aspects of this immense issue. So we really thank and value your time together with us.
This portion of the recording is taking part during the breakout sessions due to the limitations of the Zoom meeting software. The individual breakout sessions will not be broadcast. Thank you. And for people in the YouTube live stream, the breakout sessions have ended and people are returning to the main meeting. Thank you.
All right, is everyone back? Rob, do you know?
It looks like it. We had 26 going in and 19 coming out, so some people might have just left the meeting altogether.
Yeah, that's fine. We're getting close to the ending anyway. So, yeah, so we're opening up for more questions. Let's see what's in the chat here. We have about 10 more minutes for questions, so feel free to add anything to the chat and we'll try to pass that to the speakers. Let me check my own questions too, because I had some stuff. Yeah, oh yeah, so Hannah, I know you brought this up on your presentation, that there's going to be a statewide UC strike against student debt, and I'm wondering if you can go into that a little bit more.
Sorry, I may not have been clear. So there's going to there's going to be a UC-wide Cops Off Campus campaign. Cops Off Campus, Abolish Policing. And it's going to, there's so much activism going on in the UC system. There have already obviously been groups doing this for decades, right? I don't want to suggest that this is anything new, but I'm part of a UC-wide coalition of faculty. We actually organized under COLA. And now, I mean, as I said, Cops Off Campus was always a COLA demand, but because we see these two parts of abolition as linked, it feels really urgent right now to make that, to follow Movement for Black Lives and so many others who have made that Cops Off Campus demand. And the UC system is the largest public university system in the world. So it would be a really exciting precedent to be like, we just did it where we are. So that campaign is going to launch kind of publicly via social media and stuff on September 1st, kind of to coincide with the beginning of the school year. And then look out for some exciting stuff on on October 1st. So 10/1, there's going to be something really big going down that's not on social media that I'll, hopefully you'll learn more about as it rolls out. But 9/1 that will launch. Student debt campaigns, I'm happy to talk more about. There's a strike across all student debt. If you go to strike.debtcollective.org, you'll see that.
Awesome. Okay, actually I have another question, and it's related to Hope's question in the chat. So actually I wrote this for a pre-question. So at a time where like labor union membership is at an all-time low in this country, should we expect for this new generation of organizers to take up this new task in organizing around debt? And then, well, Hope's question was, would love to hear more about the relationship between labor struggle / unions and debt unions. And then I had another question, which is related as well, which anyone can add to. So if we're putting debt into a historical perspective, what other actions around debt have organizers undertaken in the past prior to Occupy that, yeah, I personally don't know much that happened like in the 1930s, like in the Great Depression. Like I don't know how debt was. Like you brought up the 1980s was like a huge spike in tuition costs and such as well. So obviously labor has been destroyed since like the end of Nixon, early Reagan era, and that's probably the rise of neoliberalism and all this stuff too. So I'm just curious throughout history as well. So. And anyone can answer. Jacques, Zilla.
So, because that was a lot of a question, so I had to think about it. But I'm just gonna say this is that like, yeah, it's kind of hard because like unions are like kind of not a thing, but are a thing. But luckily I grew up in a household where both my parents were in the DC Teachers Union. Also, my grandfather was in the male workers union. So it's like, I come from a union background. So like, that's where I believe in unions, but it is a thing where if building collectives like this one can help us focus on something that needs to be done, then it needs to be done, because something, I mean, I hate repeating myself, but like needs to be done, because like at this point, like this system that we are in, it's like you go to college, get a house, children continue this whole project that we have of the colonial capitalist project, you know, because even just like how this country started was from the Virginia Tea Company or something. So it's like we started off, we've been sponsored, this country's been sponsored from its beginnings, you know, as it was stolen. But you know what, let me stay focused. But okay, but yeah, that's what I really have to add to that, is that it's like, yeah, let's do it. Jacques, I don't know if you have something to add.
Sorry, I was a little bit not focused, because in the chat, Jumio was actually, it's kind of related though. Jumio was asking exactly what the configuration of the push again, the pushback during the New Deal era and FDR, like who was actually pushing Congress and FDR to get this radical kind of restructuring of the society accomplished, right? And I was looking for some books real quick and posted them in the chat. The short answer is the history of debt. I heard a little bit about that. I'm not so sure about it in the US, other than it didn't exist in the sense that it does now. It's really a mechanism of social control. I would suggest maybe reading David Graeber's book on debt to get more of a wider view about that. But yeah, I think that's, I don't know what else to say at the moment, but as something pops up, I'll jump back in. Sorry about that. I was distracted with getting some answers.
If I can, I'm gonna jump back in, if I may. One thing, so the Debt Collective actually has a new book coming out with Haymarket called Can't Pay, Won't Pay, the case for economic debt abolition and economic disobedience and debt abolition. If you Google it now, you can probably see it. But okay, so a couple things to one, on the question of the relationship between labor organizing and debtor organizing. I think this is such an important question. And at the Debt Collective, I feel like we see them as mutually reinforcing. So we work with labor unions. We work very closely with AFSCME, with SEIU, with teachers unions, with nurses unions, right? So there's so many ways to think about it. I'm just gonna name two. Fighting for obviously better than a $15 an hour minimum wage. But let's say we win, right? Which would be a significant win, across the board, $15 an hour minimum wage. If public school costs $40,000 to send each of your kids, $15 an hour is not going to help you. Which is to say that the wins that debtor organizing can win are central to the wins that labor can win, right? They have to go hand in hand, or else small gains in your wages. Debt is your wages of the future. So small gains in your wages is not going to help if you have to go into debt for everything you need, for your house, for your medical care, for your education. So that's one way we see them as complementary. The other way, you know, recently, nothing feels recent anymore if it was pre-COVID, but it is recently, though it was pre-COVID, there was a great GM strike, right? Factory workers in GM down in the South went on strike. That's so rad. People have been dropping this word neoliberalism, financialization. One of the things that neoliberalism has meant is that kind of classic industrial capitalist companies, like people who make cars, like GM, actually make more of their money as a lender. When you go to GM, if you get your debt contract, your car payments through GM, GM is acting as a financier. They're essentially acting as a bank. So they're making more money acting as a bank than they are acting as a car maker, right? Imagine if there was a debtors union set up so that when the GM factory workers went on strike, everybody whose car note was due to GM said, you know what? Until you meet workers' demands, we're not going to pay our fucking car note. Right? I mean, there's so many ways that we could complement one another. In fact, we need each other. I mean, we have to complement one another's struggle. So I see them as complementary, and each is necessary to the other. And then just to the question about debt resistance histories, successful debt resistance histories. Haiti, I mean, you know, a lot of Haiti's story, but it is like, so the Jubilee South movement, really amazing transnational movements to get rid of the kinds of exploitative debt relationships that Jacques was talking about. Jubilee South movement has had a lot of incredible victories throughout the 80s, throughout the 90s. And then somebody brought up the Depression, rent strikes. Rent strikes are a classic example of debt strikes, right? Which is to say, if I'm alone and I can't pay my landlord rent, then I'm screwed. But if everybody in my building doesn't pay my landlord rent, we have a lot of power. We can say, hey, we want the rent to be lower. Hey, we don't want roaches anymore. Hey, we want, right? So rent strikes are a classic example of a debt strike.
All right. So we probably have enough time for one or two more questions. And I think it's important to ask in the context of, Trump and, Joe Biden and the Democrats. And I know probably most of us on this call are obviously to the left of a lot of these things. But I'm just curious from our panelists, what y'all think of Joe Biden and the DNC platform, and can these people be pushed if we're able to get, the ultra right out of office and out of power? So that's a question for any panelists.
I will start there. Basically, my view is that both of these entities are virtually the same thing, and I think a lot of y'all probably understand that to a certain various degrees. The thing about that, what's actionable about that? I think the way that we need to see it is it doesn't matter who's in office, we have to push no matter what. So Trump being a neo-fascist and a narcissist and a nincompoop, we have to push, right? Biden being a senile, like racist, pedophile, whatever else he is, has to be pushed. A lot of us, a lot of people on the left of center side want to believe that it's going to be easier to push Biden. I don't know, and I don't really care. It doesn't matter. So that's the task and that's the challenge. We just have to put together an unstoppable wall of people that will be relentless and infuriated, because what we're facing is infuriating. And just be a tenacious, rabble-rousing bunch to get what we need.
Yeah, I was like, well, he kind of took what I was about to say, because it's true. Because the thing is that, like, we need to push, because the question I always get, they were like, well, if Hillary Clinton would have won, would there still be a poor people's campaign? Yes, it would have been, because you know what? There's still poor people in this country, period. So it's one of those things where people just need to realize that, like, we, the people, the power is to the people, power, people, we are the power. We just need to realize that, and we forgot about that, because like we've seen it in a way. Because matter of fact, like some of this conversation is good, and it's getting me thinking, especially when somebody brought up the Great Deal and the Great Depression, because we were talking about Black Reconstruction, and we put it in 3 different waves. And the second wave, some people say, happened in the 1930s during the Great Depression and the New Deal. And we're still doing research on that as like a collective to really just like see that. But I say that to say is that like we saw it even with like in 2008, Obama, like people came together, people were on the street doing what they needed to do. But as soon as he was in office, they were like, okay, we're done, But it's like, you're not done. Like the Senate seats, like whoever, because I too believe like they're basically the same. It's people who are like less extreme than the other. So you just really need to like know and care about every level. Like if you have to vote for trash man in your county, do it. Like vote for anybody, anything you need to, who is for you and shows that they're for you. And because like a lot of people, they're career politicians. So like at the end of the day, they want to get reelected. So if you complain enough and do what you need to do, they'll do what they need to do for you.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask this last question, then we'll go into our closing remarks and announcements. This is from DP, I believe that's your name. Apologize if it's not. Open big question. Do any of the panelists have reflections on connections you see between and among debt abolition, the abolition of of the white heteronormative family, gender strikes, and intergenerational feminist organizing around social reproduction, if any?
So I don't know. So as like a woman of color, like some of this doesn't even relate to me because I was never in it, because people keep yelling like women's suffrage movement, whatever, but like Zilla only got the right to vote like 70 years ago. Okay. So like it's one of those things where we just need to be understand history. But even like if you read the manifesto, like they talk about the breakdown of families in there with like, because matter of fact, we were talking about this in our group about like the connection of labor, families, and how that is. Because even now, like people are sick of their children, because like I can see in my neighborhood, it's like for children a little bit as well. But no, it's okay, because like my brother comes, I know my brother comes over here, drops off his children and takes a nap somewhere. So like it's a lot, but it's one of those things where right now we need to broaden our horizon, because it's like I don't want to say need to get out of like some of that, but it's like because like people are still doing tests on and using DNA from a woman that they stole her DNA from, the helix, you know? So, and it's like, that's not even acknowledged. You know, even in New York, the guy who would just do tests on like Black women's reproductive organs, his statue's still up, like no one's trying to take that down. So it's a lot of stuff that is there, but we just need to do that. But I feel like I got off the question a little bit, but like, yeah, I'm sorry, the system needs to go down. Like the patriarchy is real, but it's not even, but it also depends on where you look. Cause like I live in DC, our mayor is Black, okay? And she is a woman, but she's still a part of this system. She's still upholding the system. Because even yesterday on the DNC thing, I'm like, her people are perfect. Because she was right, like by Black Lives Matter Plaza, okay? But I'm like, but she also didn't like the fact that the council defunded some of the police. So it really says something about where the mindset is. And that's where we need to get out, because it's a good saying, like, all kinfolk, all skin folk and kinfolk. And it's just like one of those situations. So yes, I don't know if anyone else has anything to say.
All right. Well, yeah, I just added in the chat. I was like, yeah, Mayor Bowser also bulldozed the defund the police that BYP 100 and Black Lives Matter folks painted before the convention. So, yeah, I think we know whose side she's on. So, anyways, we have about 3 minutes left. So I want to leave the floor open for our guests for closing remarks, and then I will end with some announcements of our events coming up. So, anyone can go first. Okay, I'll choose someone. Jacques.
Put me in the hot seat, why don't you? Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say thanks to everybody, and thank you so much for this platform. It's really amazing. I'm really happy and grateful to be a part of this. The other thing I want to say is it's so awesome to see all of y'all. Anybody who wants to be a part of the Debt Collective, to join, to be a part of the struggle, and to get these debts abolished, please visit debtcollective.org and join up, get into the forum, and reach out, send emails to us, XYZ. I put my email in the chat. I'll put it again. You can just reach out to me personally, and we'll get you onboarded, or Wes or anybody else. The other thing really quickly is I think we're living in the age of neoliberalism and this fake like inclusion, right? Because they've really figured out that since integration, you just get a couple tokens and you put them in these high places, and that's that. So be it, right? I had all these kind of discussions with my parents about Obama, talking about his policies, specifically the policies, right? And they're unable to hear it. And the one thing that finally I saw it click a light in my dad's eyes. I told him being from Haiti, I told him Papa Doc and Baby Doc were Black. right? And that might not mean anything to any of y'all, but what that is the dictators that killed like parts of my mother's family and were, you know, basically aligned with U.S. interests in many ways. They were Black folks. So what we have to have an allegiance that is deeper than just who the person is, right? I'll leave you with just like a really super fast story. I'll do this one as quickly as I can. But during the revolution in Haiti, there were a group of Polish troops who came to the island. They were brought over by the French and they were supposed to be fighting us. What they ended up doing was defecting, and they joined us and fought against the French because they saw that the war was immoral, and they understood that back home they were trying to get their own independence, and they were like, why are we going to fight these folks? This is completely idiotic. So at the end of the war, we didn't know what to do with them. How do we send them back home? What do we do? I don't know. In the Constitution, our Constitution stated that all people are Black, and all citizens are Black, and to be a citizen is to be basically anti-imperial and anti-colonial, to fight for the freedom of all people, right? So how we gave the Polish troops honorary citizenship, honorary Haitian citizenship, which essentially meant they were Black. But it didn't mean they were Black like me. It meant they were Black as anti-imperial. They were anti-colonial, and they were in it for the struggle for freedom, just like John Brown, just like all these other folks, right? So it needs to be more. You can't be Mayor Daley. You can't be like Obama. You can't be Kamala Harris. You got to be Black in the sense of anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, for justice, anti-capitalist, you know, and for all these other things that are beautiful in life, you know, free education, free healthcare, leisure time for your family, all this other stuff. That's what we have to be fighting for. That's who all of our allies need to be. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're down to throw down, then I'm down with you. And that's the way it is.
I mean, yeah, and I can go next after that, because I mean, I too, like, that's how, so I put in the chat, we have done the moral budget, so we've really like shown how we can reallocate funds to really help our community. Also, there's the Jubilee budget as well that really shows like what we can really do with this money if we just switch it around a little bit. You know, I mean, they can still have their war economy and all that, but it's also like, let's just put some, you know, let's get some grocery stores in neighborhoods. Let's just do that. Let's just do the basics. Also, I'm putting my email in here, but like Jacques said, I'm also with that. Like, if you're for the liberation of the people, then you can ride with me, because that's where I am with it. Because like, you know, like why Martin was killed, why the Rainbow Push Coalition was disbanded and people were killed, why a lot of people were just, something happened to them, is because when you try to connect the bottom so they can rise up, the elite gets scared. So it's one of those things where I believe in power of the people. The campaign knows that like there's another way out there, you know? So it is one thing to like, yeah, go vote for people who are gonna like kill us less, you know, like kind of. I mean, that's a terrible way to put it, but like just people we just need to just do what we need to do. Yeah, and that's it.
Can I add a little story that after what Jacques said? Can you hear me?
Hey, Francisco, can you let Hannah finish and then?
Yes, by all means.
Oh no, I feel like what Jacques and Zilla said was like super good. All power to the people. Now is our time. I guess that's the only other thing I would say. This is a really unusual moment right now. And I feel like we have to recognize that we are still in this moment. That window is open and we just need to push and push and push and push and push and not stop. Like now is our time.
Yeah, Francisco, you can go ahead.
Oh, just I really enjoy that story, Jacques. Thank you so much, and Hannah, thank you so much for those words. Also, and everybody who has been here, Zilla, I really enjoyed hearing you talk. But it really reminded me of a story about with the Mexican-American War, where the Irish actually joined the Mexican troops because they saw that what the Americans were doing wasn't great. So they were stealing, I mean, they bought the land, but they basically took it at gunpoint. And so I think, like you said, you know, putting who you are or what you think, or what they've told you what you are aside, and putting morals first and doing what's right. And so I think being able to unite on those kinds of fronts is important. And so, yeah, I think that's awesome. And thank you everybody for uniting today.
All right. Well, with
I'm
that,
sorry,
it's.
Can I?
Oh
okay.
yeah. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add one more thing, because like what Francisco just said helped me, like because some stuff, it's like I had to just personally unlearn myself about like where we are in the world. And I just recommend that like you just tell people, and even how Jacques said, like help frame it for like people to understand is also key to like winning this fight. Because like Hannah said, we are in a great moment that we need to keep pushing, because we are at a place where people can start co-opting and start trying to twist it and do what they need to do to help that, because the political elite is strong, they're getting smart. Like the fact, like they had like one of the Black Lives Matter, they had their whole legal team out there, like they're getting more sophisticated. And right now we need to have our own strategies and tactics so we can win this. So yeah, that's the last thing, sorry.
I put a link into the chat of a song about those Irish folks who fought on the side of Mexico during the 1850s. It's a song by my friend David Rovix. Good one. Thanks for bringing up that history.
All right, with that, it's 8:06. I don't want to hold folks over much longer. I do want to announce one event coming up tomorrow night. The Claudia Jones School, in collaboration with Black Women Radicals, we are hosting an intergenerational conversation with former Black Panthers Erica Huggins and Denise Oliver Velez. So myself and the lead organizer with Black Women Radicals will be in conversation with them tomorrow from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern. So if you're on our mailing list, so if you're at these events, you'll get an email about that tonight to register if you haven't yet. And we also have an event coming up in September that will be plugged later, but it'll be about worker co-ops and the movement for socialism, featuring Richard Wolff, Jessica Gordon Nimhard, and another organizer from Chile. I'm blanking on the name right now. So that'll be coming up in late September. And then we have some other events we're in the process of organizing. So thank you to our guests for coming out tonight. And thank you to those that are still on the call and for participating. Yeah, Hannah, Jacques, Zilla, thank you so much. Wes as well, and Rob for helping out as well. And I hope all of you learned something tonight. And you know, Debt Collective has their website, and they also have a YouTube channel, which has a lot of these videos that Hannah was mentioning on her slides. And then this is recorded, and it will also be on our YouTube channel as well for future reference. So yeah, so thank you everyone, and have a good night.